Welcome, everybody. Today I'm speaking to Brendan Adamczyk, and he is this year's recipient of the University of Oregon Sustainability Award for Students. This award, which is sponsored by the Student Sustainability Center, recognizes students who have made significant impacts toward human equity, environmental vitality, and economic well-being at the University of Oregon. The Student Award is often a lifetime achievement award of sorts, honoring work done throughout the student's time here. In Brendan's case, those achievements include being co-director of the student group Climate Justice League, creating new programming around environmental leadership in his role, or environmental justice in his role as a student employee at the Holden Center for Leadership and Community Engagement, and pushing upper administration to consider students' opinions when it comes to the university's climate action plan, which was updated in 2019, among other issues. And Brendan, I am looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Great. So to start, why don't you tell me a little bit about your environmental justice programming work with the Holden Center?
Yeah, so that was a kind of a great way to sort of serve as a capstone on my academic professional organizing career in my couple years here at the UO. So I started at the Holden Center this past fall, and what I really wanted to do was try to find a way. I think there were a lot of students who were learning about environmental justice in their classes, but they weren't really finding that connection to the real world. They were having to do, I think, that little bit of extra work. And I think we were losing students who would have been interested in doing more work and learning more about that, but kind of didn't have the time to take the academic jump. So I wanted to find a way to get them to take that jump outside. So the Holden Center has a series of leadership workshops that we offer for students and student groups. And my thought was to design one around environmental justice and sort of grounding it in practice. And really quickly, I connected with someone named Pablo Alvarez, who works at the Eugene nonprofits Beyond Toxics and the Eugene Springfield NAACP. And I've worked with him in the past. He's a great community organizer. And they actually had already begun to develop an environmental justice workshop focusing on how environmental justice works in city planning. So I worked with him, and I met with a lot of other people doing this kind of work on campus, as well as several people in the community. And we were able to pull together a 3-hour workshop that basically drops people into a role in city planning. So maybe one person is the chair of the NAACP, and another person is the chair of an environmental group, and another person is the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. And we put them in an imaginary town that we call Greensville, which is just Oregon, just Eugene, rather. And basically what they were told to do is they had to work together with the other people who were all playing this role to build a low-income housing project. And it was a really great experience, because I think that when we did it, people kind of didn't see the connections to environmental justice, but really quickly they saw how in every step of this process, where you site the project, what you decide to build it out of, whether it's, where it's placed, whether you do, even like a parking garage or a parking lot, these kind of tiny things that you can see the justice impacts at every step of the way. And it was a really great experience for people to kind of step into this role and understand how this works on a city level. And so it was really great. We piloted it and we ran it with folks from the Holden Center and several other community organizers, as well as someone named Zeta Melosa, who is at the University of Oregon's Student Sustainability Center as well. And we were ready to launch it in the spring. With everything going on with COVID-19, we won't be, but we will be preparing to launch it in the fall and trying to get other students interested in environmental justice work to see how they can really, get this hands-on experience.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And it almost sounds like something that could be useful not just for college students. I can see students being a target audience to make those connections, but it seems like a lot of people could use to make those connections, and it's a good kind of framework for doing that.
Yeah, and I know actually the original workshop that we worked with from the community perspective was actually intended for community members who might kind of be in this environmental perspective but not have that justice aspect. So it was actually a really good challenge to adapt it to students, but I think my ultimate hope was that we could offer it for community members as well. I think, like you said, there's a really great opportunity to get people involved there.
Yeah, and do you expect that it'll be of highest interest to students in sort of public planning, policy and management, or environmental studies, or is it sort of the framework doesn't matter, it's still a useful tool for everybody who might be interested?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first our hope was to start with those groups and kind of, we've only run it through once really. And the idea was to kind of run it through a couple times and see how people react to it, be so, so focused on the planning aspect. But I think our ultimate goal was that a lot of these workshops, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of them focus on in basically injecting justice into environmental spaces. Well, I think that's great. That can often leave people who are already doing justice work out of the environmental spaces. So our idea was to kind of work within environmental spaces, but hopefully eventually work with other groups like the Multicultural Center on campus to really see how we can bring environmental work into other folks doing justice work and kind of find the overlaps there.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing about how it goes in the future as well. So tell me a little bit about Climate Justice League. What does the organization do, and what work have you done as part of the group?
Yeah, so I think as you mentioned in the beginning, we're a student group. We're student funded through the ASUO student fees. It's really cool. We've been on campus for, I think this past winter was our decade, our 10-year anniversary, which is really cool. We were started in response to the university's kind of first round of addressing the climate action plan, and basically some students thought there wasn't a group who was really specifically focused on environmental and climate justice issues on campus, and so they started a group. So we've done a lot of great work kind of in our history. We helped to get, to push to get those like refillable water bottle stations on campus. We worked to save several local forests like the Elliott State Forest, Thurston Hills Natural Area, which is in Springfield, and recently the Windy Peak Forest in Triangle Lake. And it's been really great in that we've kind of, over our years, we've done a lot of work of helping students see the connections between environmental work and justice work. In my time at the CJL, I started my freshman year, and I was a campaign coordinator doing a lot of work on our campus sustainability plan, which is basically trying to get more composting and reducing, single-use plastic use on campus. And then I was able to, in the past 2 years, I've served as co-director, and it's been a really great experience on a personal level because I've learned a lot about managing. I have a steering team of 10 other students who we help coordinate CJL's campaigns. And it's also been great because then we've been able to do a lot of these, those campaigns I mentioned, a lot of other work in developing like a sustainability guide for students entering campus. And it's just been a really great way to kind of combine professional growth as a leader with really trying to make a difference in the UO community.
Yeah, fantastic. And as I'm sure you've realized, activism or engagement over the long haul is as much organizing and people wrangling and management stuff as it is marching in the streets. Yeah, that's great. So actually, I guess I maybe stepped on your toes a little bit there, but how has this extracurricular work in student groups and as a student employee contributed to your education and growth at the UO? And why do you think other students should get involved beyond classes?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on a little. I think the biggest aspect is that you really do get to see this kind of simultaneous, personal growth, professional growth, and then this kind of giving back to the community. And I think it's a really powerful thing to get this experience of, like you said, most work is just really managing other people doing the work when you get good at it, which is, I think, a hard thing for people to adjust to. It's been weird. I haven't really done much of the, like asking for signatures on petition on the, on 13th and University kind of work, because that's not what you do when you get to be a good organizer. You help organize other people who then collect volunteers to do that work. So it's a really great kind of preview of what the nonprofit and advocacy world can look like. But I think for me, one of the most powerful things is that, throughout my whole time, I'm an environmental studies major, and throughout my whole time, my academic career, I've been learning about environmental justice, about doing activism that's participatory, that centers the community, about making sure to listen to the voices of those most affected. And it's great to learn about that in a theoretical sense, but much like that environmental justice workshop, it is really powerful to get to do it in the real world. And the Climate Justice League work has really allowed me to kind of take these things I'm learning in the classroom and take them to the real world and see and, kind of battle test them. And a lot of them, work. There's a reason scholars developed environmental justice paradigms, but a lot of them also don't necessarily work in, Eugene and activism in a place like Eugene. And so it's been really just a powerful experience to do this work and really see what's effective and what's not, and kind of get to be learning in the classroom one week and doing it the next week. And I think that's the biggest encouragement I can give for folks to get involved.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it's taking that academic knowledge and really getting a chance to test run it, see how it works in practice.
Exactly.
Yeah. So right. Okay. So let's talk about the university's climate action plan, which was revised in 2019. And you were involved in that process of revision. And so tell me a little bit about how you got involved and what impacts your work had on it.
Yeah, so I first got involved when I first joined the CJL. We were working on continuing to push the university as they were finalizing this version, this updated climate action plan. So it's definitely interesting. We got to do a couple direct action protests on campus. We had some folks lie down in the EMU in the shape of an oil drop to call attention to the universities. At that point, still investments in fossil fuels. They've recently divested, which is another campaign we ran, which was great. So I had sort of heard about the Climate Action Plan, and the second edition called Climate Action Plan 2.0 or CAP 2.0 was released in the fall of 2018. And I remember that the Office of Sustainability held a kind of a town hall type, informational session on it. I remember going to it and thinking, this is really great, but there's more that can be done. Students should be involved more. The university has, the systems in place to be bolder about our goals, and we weren't using it. So I went to Taylor in the Student Sustainability Center, who's the director there, and I began talking to other students who felt the same way, to staff who felt the same way, and to faculty, and we started to build an amendment. And it was a really great experience, kind of like I said, in applying these academic goals to the real world, because one of the great experiences I had was going to the Native Strategies Group, which is a collection of staff and faculty who are working on Indigenous issues or are Indigenous themselves. And we actually got the sort of beginning of this amendment was to recognize that, Eugene has this history of being environmental, but the people who are before us, the Kalapuya tribe, also have a history of this environmental protection of the land. And so really recognizing that the roots in this work are in the roots of the people who are here before us. And all of that work, we collected a petition. We had over 500 signatures. All of the environmental studies and geography department faculty signed on. It was a really great experience. And then I brought it to the president, and we were able to get a meeting with him. And we talked about what we wanted to see, what we wanted the university to do, which was mainly to form an advisory board that had students on it, to better leverage our campus's already existing, in particular academic systems, to really educate more people about climate change, and mostly to commit to bolder carbon neutrality goals, specifically carbon neutrality on campus by 2050, which is what the best climate science tells us we have to do. And then we had a second meeting with him a couple months later, and he agreed to those. And it was really kind of powerful to see how our advocacy and specifically our broad movement had really gotten him to see why this kind of climate action was important on campus. And it was really great success. That advisory board that we pushed for exists. I sit on it. It's been really powerful. We've got to review several things that the university's planning on doing, studies they're carrying out as they begin to approach carbon neutrality. The only downside was the carbon neutrality component of the bill, of the amendment, was to get the university to agree to sign on to the statewide Clean Energy Jobs Bill, which unfortunately did not pass either last year or earlier this year because of holdups in the legislature. But otherwise, it was a really great experience in how a broad coalition can really get some stuff done.
Yeah, and you're making me think it was really effective, and especially for a student-led or student-driven thing, that sometimes those can be ineffective or only partially effective or easy to ignore. What advice would you have for students if they wanted to do any kind of big initiative, something to get the institution's attention? What do you think made this effective?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and certainly one that I've been asked as a result of this work. And I think that my biggest recommendation is, students are powerful. We're the reason, the university exists at the end of the day for us. So having student power is a really important part of it. But I think that the other really important side of the university are the faculty. And I think the fact that when we went to the president, we had, the entire geography department, the entire environmental studies department, the Center for Environmental Futures, and in the business school, the sustainable business department in the business school, and having these faculty who, the university recognizes the importance of these faculty, and especially at the UO, we have some real experts in our field. Kari Norgard in the sociology department I believe she's the head of the American Environmental Sociology division. We have a lot of great people in our, natural sciences department who are working with the IPCC at the, highest level of climate science. And so I think bringing the combination of this really, student movement, but also showing that it's not just students who are angry about this, it's the people who are the experts really care. And I think that combining that work and showing that to the president and being respectful, but also, forceful, I came with our demands, and those were our demands. And I think that doing that work, sort of combining the faculty and student side, is the biggest recommendation. And faculty care. They were fired up students 30 years ago too. So they want to get involved. It's just reaching out to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a little bit too of a combination of coalition building on one hand, but also just demonstrating the value for a large enough body of people as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. So my second to last question for you is, you're graduating this quarter. What's next for you, if you know and feel you can say?
Well, definitely the whole world-ending pandemic has certainly thrown a wrench in some of those plans, but my biggest goal has always been to get involved into environmental policy on a national scale. I was able to intern last summer in DC, Washington, D.C. for an environmental nonprofit, and it was a really powerful experience to see, that there's certainly some problems with the way that we do policymaking in this country, but there's really are ways that you can impact people, and there are people who listen. So I think I really do want to do that kind of environmental nonprofit advocacy policymaking work. But before I can do that, I think it's really important that we have people who are politicians who want to listen to us. And so my goal was really to work on the 2020 election. And that also has been, the election is going to look a lot different now that so much of the campaign work that's going to happen is going to be digital. But I think it'll be a really interesting experience to explore what online work looks like, both in terms of environmental activism and campaign political work. But so the ultimate hope is to do some work on a campaign and then get involved in the nonprofit advocacy sector. I foresee an environmental law degree in my future one day, but I am in no rush to go back to school. So I think that my hope is just to try to find the field in which I can make the biggest difference pushing environmental justice policies on the largest scale possible.
Great. All right. And then last question is, why do you think it's important to engage with sustainability topics at the UO? And I'm thinking here of the three-legged stool of sustainability that includes environment, equity, and economy. So feel free to talk about whatever pieces resonate most with you.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing I can say is that the ability to do the work I do, whether it's with the Climate Justice League or anywhere else, certainly I have received, stipends for some work, but it wouldn't pay as much as a job does. And so I recognize that I have privilege in the fact that I can afford to do, 5 to 10 hours a week of work on this and not get paid as much as I would, because having a full-time job while I go to school is not something that I need to do. So with that in mind, I think it's really important that I know that I can, have the time for that, but I want to make sure that the rest of our membership, that we can make sure that we're as open and as easy to access as possible. And so I think that kind of gets at the equity piece, but also kind of that sustainability as a whole, that I think that this kind of work isn't always accessible. And so I think that engaging with it, the more people engage, the more people who, whether you have the time and the privilege like I do, or whether you just care about these issues, the more accessible this world can get. And so that's kind of my overarching umbrella for this work. Two kind of big pieces that I really care about that kind of address all the three legs of that stool is, first, like I mentioned earlier, environmentalism. Certainly the work we've done in the Climate Justice League has been, I would argue, a lot more of the traditional environmentalism, very environmental focused. And we're always trying to bring in justice because environmentalism, even at its core, is linked with a lot of, troubling ideas, whether it was the establishment of national parks by removing indigenous peoples across the West, or whether it was a rise of, nativist environmentalism that was pushed by people who wanted to wield this, anti-immigration rhetoric in order to, keep our environment clean. And so the work we do in sustainability, it's really powerful that as we engage now, that we do it in a way that is really sustainable, that is really focused on the justice aspect that's at the core of our environmental work. And I think that kind of links to the last part of this, which is that I want to do intersectional work. And I think that the more I engage and can change this, and the more others do, we can point out to folks that, the environmental justice and climate justice work we're doing, well, it's also connected deeply to issues of racial justice. In that, Black folks and people of color in this country are 2 or 3 times more likely to be exposed to, deadly toxins, even today. Even as the coronavirus has exposed that there are a lot of flaws in our healthcare system and in our economy, and just so many of these links that I think that folks don't see. We want to silo. We want to say, I'm going to do environmental work and you do social justice work. And really, I want to engage, and I've tried to do this work, and I've seen it happen at UO in trying to get people to find the areas where these overlap, because they're there. And ultimately, I think that, you know, when we all work together, we can create a world where we're fighting climate change and we're fighting economic and racial and gendered injustice. And we're doing it in a way, when we all work together, we'll make sure that no one gets left behind. I think that that's the most important thing. I want to make sure that as we address these problems, we don't do it just for people who look like me, but for everyone who's affected by climate change.
Great. Well, Brendan, it has been a pleasure to talk to you today, and wish you all the best in your future, and congratulations on your award as well.
Thank you very much. I feel very lucky to have this.